Thank you. At this time, if we could be prepared as board members to ask questions regarding the presentation that we'd received for the return to school mitigation.
Yeah, and I'll ask the presenters to come back up if possible, Ms. Farage, Mr. Mustonen, and Ms. Candes, and I'll be happy to answer as well as necessary.
Okay. Trustee Barry.
I got a question. Mrs. Faraj mentioned that we have 550 students in the Dearborn Public Schools virtual school. I received a couple phone calls on this subject, and I understand there's people commenting on our page. I know back in June, with a decision we made last year, we said, need to make a decision. You're going into virtual academy or you're gonna be in person. But according to the presentation today, June was the deadline, and back then it was, COVID was at 1% positivity rate. And now we're seeing 7.7, and it's a slight increase, heading, obviously in the wrong direction. Are we gonna give parents an opportunity, even though I was the first one that spoke up and said, no, this is your decision, it's final, but things have changed? Are we gonna have parents an opportunity to get into the virtual if possible? And what is that process if we are?
So I can comment on that. We are going through the boundary line exemption, just like you're enrolled in a school and you want to move into another school, you have to apply for it after the deadline. We're doing our best, but I will be honest, because of staffing, which is what we've said all along, we don't have the ability, we can do a certain number. And in fact, because of some of the teacher shortages, I just had a meeting with Mr. Wall a little while ago and the exec team, and we did agree to hire a couple more teachers to help, but we don't have an endless ability, and now we're starting. So we're gonna get at a point where we just can't because of our staffing model. So we're trying our best, but, we tried to, tell people, we don't know the conditions. Come June, if you really, think that, and I understand conditions change, just like this.
Sure.
So we'll do our best, but the reality is that we may not be able to get everyone in that wants to shift at this point in time. It would just be like if you had massive number of students shifting from a Lindbergh to a Duval, you can't accommodate that, But again, we've always tried to do our best, and so we have the process, and Mr. Mashur is doing a great job and working with Ms. Peterson because she had a very challenging job just to put together a schedule because it's a K-12 school. So we'll do our best, but we can't guarantee.
Sure. Have we had a lot of requests?
We've had, I
last
can't
10
remember the
days?
number, but the requests have gone up, but I wouldn't say I can't remember the exact number, Ms. Farage. Do you remember how many?
We have 538
Initial.
enrolled officially, and we have about 25 more waiting.
Yeah, so it's,
And Mr. Mashur does involve principals in the decision-making, so when he's making
Yeah.
these decisions, he follows the
So-
procedure.
So what I'm gonna do, my answer to the parents have contacted me and say, pretty much it's a numbers game. There's room, nothing's guaranteed. If there's room, they'll go through student services, and if it works out, it works out, but nothing's guaranteed.
no, they'd have to apply just like the boundary line for other schools. If you wanted to go from school, you applied, let's say, for Etzel, and you were actually in the Fordson boundaries, you'd have to go through
Sure, no, I
that
understand, I
process.
understand it. So if a teacher has 7 or 8 students in her classroom, I don't know, we haven't seen the numbers, I'm giving an example, and somebody wants to move into virtual and there's room,
If there's room, yeah.
we can accommodate.
We'll accommodate if there's room, just
there's
like
room. It's a
a
numbers
normal
game.
school.
That's what it comes down
And
to.
then we did just hire 2 teachers. So I would look at like the numbers that Ms. Farage mentioned. In a district our size, let's say we added 60 students, that's not a huge number. The huge numbers were when we had the massive switch last year, when we had literally, over thousands that were trying to switch, and then hundreds in the elementary. So we couldn't accommodate that. But if there's, like she said, we're looking at the numbers right now. Those might be possible, but they have to go through the process.
Sure. I mean, the data we put out today, that's scaring people, and that's why, data
Sure,
we put out
understood.
last week and the week before, that's scaring people, and that's why they're requesting that, so. I have other comments, but I'll wait for my colleagues to see.
Trustee Petlicoff.
Well, and I'm gonna have a lot of things that are gonna go in a lot of different directions. One, I'm going to ask about, have a I brought up the comment about what the real purpose of the masks are. And the only reason the masks work is if everybody's wearing them. Because it's not just for what's coming at me, it's what I'm giving off as well. I know these masks and the warning on the labels, they've always had them because they're not a surgical grade to be worn in a hospital in anticipation of protecting you from a heavy viral load. But in the world of our day-to-day existence as we're experiencing now, can you explain how effective, because there is clearly a large misunderstanding and a disbelief that the masks do anything.
Excuse me, I'm gonna remove this so you can hear me. Okay, so there is a lot of data out there that supports that masks do help to mitigate the spread of the virus. And currently, so a little bit about the virus is, and what I hear about masks not working is the virus is small enough to pass through the mask. And that is true. The virus itself is very tiny. But in order to leave the body, it has to have a carrier, or a car, so to speak. So it attaches itself to some sort of droplet, and it is carried out of the body on that droplet. The droplet is what gets stopped in the mask. So cloth masks have been shown to block large droplets anywhere from about 20 to 30 microns, and fine particles, which they call aerosols, are about less than 10. So in a multi-layer mask, which is what we usually have recommended, things that have multiple layers so you have more chances of catching, they reduce the transmission by 50 to 70% of fine particles. And they limit the forward spread as well as protecting from you breathing it in. So they do work in two ways. Did I answer your question?
Yeah,
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure that
There's a
people.
lot out there, and what I have to say is, the nursing team has thrown themselves into this pandemic, and we have tried to be the source of solid scientific information. At times, it's been hard to do. It's easy to be pulled into stories and different thought processes. And we try to talk with many people who are experts above us, read lots of peer-reviewed studies, and we try to pull the data from places that have provided us sources of information, credible sources of information throughout the pandemic. We've spent hours and hours and hours learning about COVID, how it spreads, how we protect, and we have done what we could to try to show our staff and families that we care about them and that we try to make these decisions with their safety in mind. And so that being said, I feel my responsibility as a district nurse is to protect and to educate. And so that's what I try to do. I know there'll be a difference of opinions, but you know, we try to pull the most reliable, peer-reviewed studies in order to present you with the data that we feel is most reliable.
Does everybody want to take a turn?
Well, yeah, however we want to do it. I figured we wouldn't all hit a bunch of questions right away. We'd kind of rotate.
Yeah.
So trustee McDonald or trustee Watts, did you have a question at this time?
There was something, and I don't remember if it was in the presentation about the social emotional learning. So I guess, because we're gonna have students who have not been back in person 5 days a week since March of 2020. And I know that there's so much anxiety and excitement, but I worry about when they come to the classroom, what how that anxiety is going to exhibit and how it's going to come and be shown in the classroom. So I guess I'm thinking, in the first couple of weeks, we're going to have a lot of anxious children, excitement, but also anxious because they haven't had this routine in such a long time. And we know that children are routine oriented. So I just want to make sure that our teachers that they're staffed accordingly so that when they do have some students that need maybe some extra help adjusting, that is put in place. Because I know parents are going to be excited. There's going to be mixed emotions with everybody. So I just want to make sure that when those students, maybe the high schoolers that haven't come since, right, this might be their first time, and they don't know what the inside of the high school looks like 5 days a week.
Right. Thank you for asking. This is very important. And this is one of the things we're emphasizing with staff is in the beginning, the focus will be social emotional learning, building those relationships. Even with the mitigation plan that we did for staff and administrators, it is slightly different than the one on the district website. It does in the beginning include a paragraph on how to spend time in the beginning of class talking to students, even if they break students into small groups, to take time in the beginning even of that small group, which is even shorter than the class period, and talk to students, know how they're feeling, try to identify if there are any issues. How do you identify trauma? And the district is running professional development for the entire staff on Wednesday on trauma-informed instruction and making sure that teachers can identify when students have these issues and find the right resources to support them. Even if the students do not exhibit any of these behaviors, this is across the board where we're gonna be doing more interactions with students and getting to know them, getting to know what's bothering them if there are any issues, and not only with students, also with families. So social emotional learning is a huge emphasis that is taking place this year. And the other thing is the district goal of social emotional learning is another thing that we're working on. The surveys that we administered in April last year, we gave the surveys to students, staff, and parents, and they had aligned questions on social emotional learning, and we worked with the special ed department with Mike and his team, and also included questions on that. Analysis of these questions will also guide our goals in the social emotional area. I hope I answered your question.
And I just wanted to say for those parents who are saying, like, this sounds like something my child would benefit from before going to school, what would be the resource, or how would you suggest they go about it? Do they reach out to the principal of the building and say, hey, I think my child could really benefit from, I don't know, because you don't know as a parent, like they need something, but you don't know what. You don't know how to identify those connections.
So what I spoke about was from the teacher's side and the administrator's side. We also want to encourage the parents to reach out to the classroom teacher, to the principals, to the support staff in the buildings, to any of us. So parents are encouraged to reach out to the school staff and make sure that if they do notice the child is having any difficulties to get help for that child and support.
No, she did a phenomenal job. Thank you, Ms. Faraj.
She did.
Absolutely. I think I'm going to echo a lot of the things that she said. We also, if you recall, last year we had some screeners that we administered not only for parents, but also for students as well. And we're actually enhancing that process this year. And I know in my board briefs, I think a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned, a huge success, and obviously from the support of our superintendent and our entire board, is that we do have a full-time social worker in every single school now. And I can't tell you what a huge win that is moving forward, because their expertise that they're going to bring not only to our staff, but for the students and everybody else is going to be, I think, incredible. And we're also going to, work with our social workers on look-fors. And in turn, the social workers can work with their teachers, whether it's through our MTSS process or whatever the situation is. But I can tell you it's really on the forefront of what we're doing. And, like Ms. Faraj mentioned, the very first professional development back for all of our teachers on August 25th is going to be the trauma-informed. And hopefully we're going to continue to carry over. Really, our goal is to continue to build that capacity amongst all of our staff, not just our social workers or counselors as well.
Can I follow up since you're at the
Yeah.
podium? And I know this was mentioned, and I have to say, we have a lot of our students who have special needs, and I think getting them in the classroom 5 days a week is going to be so valuable for them. But I want to make sure, what steps are we taking so that when they come in the classroom, and they're going to be there 5 days a week, fingers crossed that we can maintain that we're hitting every single all of their needs and their parents' needs.
Absolutely. And Trustee Watts, I think this started really right when the shutdown happened. If you guys recall, with your support, we made sure to bring in our most vulnerable population 5 days a week in last year. We also, over this year, we provided over the summer some very, very intensive, what we called recovery services. Now, for some of our families who couldn't make it over the summer, we're also making sure, what we're doing is to ensure that we provide those services throughout the school year, whether it's through an extended program, additional IEP hours, or whatever the situation may be. I think, whenever you shut down instruction, especially for our students with learning challenges or learning disabilities, I think they do ultimately sometimes carry the burden. And I want you to know that it's really been on the forefront of our planning to make sure not only are we working with families, but also working with those specific students to ensure that we are looking at some of the models and making sure that they are receiving more instruction they need. I'll tell you that this past year when we were doing the hybrid learning, what we did was we had every single special education teacher actually bring in our students, not just the 2 days a week for learning labs, but possibly 4 days a week for learning labs, and work exclusively with them on some of their IEP goals as well as some of their academics as well. And we have plenty success stories. In addition to that, for our elementary teachers, we're training them all in what we call brain-based learning or brain-based reading or brain-friendly reading. And really what it is, it's kind of an offshoot of Orton Gillingham. And what it's made to do is really, really focus in, laser focus on some of the reading instruction so we can close a little bit of that achievement gap. Now, we still have challenges that are going to come, obviously, just like everybody else in every other district. But I think we're confident right now in the plan that we have, hopefully, to mitigate some of those challenges and continue to close some of the gaps.
All right, thank you.
Can I just
Mr.
briefly add
President?
something?
I just wondered, can I speak on that for just a second?
Go ahead.
Okay. It was interesting, Trustee Watts, that when you said, what were we going to do for the students that have these anxiety issues? And I was the district nurse that worked through the summer program. I happened to have, in a span of 2 weeks, at separate schools, children that seemed to experience some anxiety at being back in the school. What I'd like the parents to realize is that signs of anxiety can be very physical. So these children can experience things like chest pain, rapid heart rate, sweating, feeling like they're going to sweat. Pass out. And that's scary to children because they feel that something big is happening to them. So it's important for the parents to be assessing their children as well at home and realizing that some of the behavior issues or some of the complaints that they're hearing can actually be anxiety related. So it was one of the things educators and medical staff like us, the school nurses, were worried about when we entered into the pandemic and how that was going to change the social environment in the school classrooms. So I think that it was clear to me at those 2 weeks when I had several cases in different areas. In this particular instance, it seemed to be affecting more of the middle schoolers, which I also expect. But just parents need to be tuned into their kids and paying attention to symptoms and realizing that it may not be a physical problem, but more something that's anxiety that looks like a physical issue.
And I wanted to add also stomach pains. I feel like there's a lot of students who are asking that they're saying their stomachs are hurting. So just something to be aware of.
I'll have that happen a lot of times even in elementary school where I'll have children that come into the office repeatedly saying that their stomach hurts. And when you approach that with them and say, well, are you worried about something? Is something bothering you? Do you have a test? They will open up and say that. So, but it's scary to them because the symptoms are very physical. And so they think something more is wrong. And we just need to make sure that we have open communication for the students and families because it is something that we're going to expect to see more of as school comes back into session.
So before I make my comment, I appreciate, just want to thank, we have the nurse, Candace, and our nurses are outstanding, and they've done a great job all year. I really appreciate, plus wouldn't survive without them, so thank you. And they have a great relationship with Wayne County Health Department. The other thing I just want to comment on is, and that's why we've been promoting in-person instruction. What we're trying to do with our mitigation is to keep students in school. We know there's no replacement for in-person instruction. We offered the virtual program. Although I advocate for in-person instruction, I respect the parent's right to choose as well. But I would always advocate for in-person instruction. And I think that's where, especially last year, and I think, Mike, I've said it to you, and Dr. Rice, the state superintendent, has talked to me about students, at-risk students and special ed students. Biggest concern we had throughout, I was always talking to him with the learning labs. So there's no replacement, and that's the other reason why we invested, and we appreciate the support of the board for investing in this massive summer program that we had. When we went into the schools, we see the excitement of the students. I'd also say this, that I think for a lot of parents, this may be kindergarten all over. Because, I remember being an elementary principal and going in and, especially mothers with the first child coming in with anxiety. Well, I think with COVID, whatever the age is now, some of that is out there. So as a staff, we have to recognize that and provide support. And then we also have to provide that social emotional support for our staff. And we do have a process for that because they're gonna have some feelings. And remember, they're parents too, and they're working hard and they're doing excellent work, as was mentioned by others that came out here. And I really appreciate the outstanding work of our teachers and all staff because it has been a tough year and a half. So I just wanted to add that, and I'll let you go ahead, President Thor.
Trustee Moses.
Thank you, Mr. President. One citizen speaker mentioned the district missing on some contingency plan for our special ed students. So I'm also very concerned about that, and I'd like a report to see if we have missed any deadlines for contingency plans or IEP plans for our students last year.
Go ahead.
Great comment. Trustee Moses, I'll be more than happy to provide that report. In fact, it's one of the indicators that, as far as deadlines with IEPs, that our state actually grades Dearborn Public Schools on, and we typically get a very, very high rate within that indicator. I'm talking about higher than 99%. I can't, sometimes, if a staff member does miss a deadline on an annual IEP, we make sure to correct that. However, that is actually one of the indicators that I feel like we are strongest in within the district. And as far as contingency learning plans, just like I think everything else, whether it was the federal government, whether it was the state, I think we were all really trying to figure out, okay, how do we make this work for students with IEPs? Part of that solution was to create a contingency learning plan for every single student. And really the basis of the contingency learning plan was, okay, how do we mitigate what's going to happen virtually or through a distance and replicate it for actually what goes on in person? So within that, we met actually with every single family and every single child with an IEP got a contingency learning plan. And that's where we looked at, what the mode of instruction is going to be. Now, obviously for many of our students, it was distance learning. What do they need through distance learning? Do they need special education packets? They may need special education packets because maybe it's just hard for them to go in on the internet, or maybe it's hard for them to focus via Zoom. What are some of the resources they need at home? And I could tell you, our staff, and Dr. Maleko just talking about our staff, really went above and beyond. We had some of our physical therapists, some of our occupational therapists, taking to the home and delivering some equipment so they can support the parents with some of these therapies. Also with the support of the board, if you recall, we also purchased Presence Learning, which was a video platform, but also resources to provide our ancillary staff, whether it's school social workers, occupational therapists, speech and language pathologists, on how to deliver instruction more effectively through a distance. And again, I'm going to echo what Dr. Maleko said. You're never going to replace in-person instruction. However, I do have to give our hats off to our staff that, you had so many stories who went truly above and beyond trying to meet the needs of all of our students.
And I just add too, we also know that not just Dearborn students, but students across the state and the nation are behind because of COVID last year. So we have to recognize that. And that's why we're going to have additional interventions and supports for our students. And we're going to do that with special ed students and all students that need it.
Absolutely.
Trustee McDonald.
Yeah, we hear about a lot of comparison between COVID and the flu. And I just want you to touch on a little bit about the differences, especially with the Delta variant. And I know that there's been cases of multi-system inflammatory syndrome and things that occur with COVID. and what treatments are available, and just kind of compare and contrast the two to put out some relevant and accurate information on that, please.
So in terms of COVID and the flu, the similarities are that they are respiratory viruses. They usually generate or replicate in the nasal mucosa. And that's one of the reasons why our vaccines are, they're not called sterilizing immunity. So we do have some vaccines that we get that have what we call sterilizing immunity. It's antibodies that will prevent the replication of the virus. And COVID, by the nature of its virus, doesn't provide sterilizing immunity. So when we're talking about vaccination, the purpose of the vaccination isn't really to prevent the infection, it's to give your body the answer key on how to prevent long-term issues, illnesses, and things like that. And the difficulty with it is it replicates in the nasal mucosa before it hits our blood system, which is where our long-term antibodies are kept. So that's one of the, they're similar in that regard, but different viruses. But they are, in the way that they work is similar because they're respiratory. Delta has been found to be about as contagious as chickenpox. So trying not to get too scientific on it, we talk about the R0 factor, which is how many people are infected. If one person is positive, how many people can they infect? And that generates what we call an R0. And I have it written here, so if you give me just a second, I can tell you what that is. Delta is more than 200% more transmissible and results in about 1,000 times higher viral load. That is a big deal there because the thought process is the amount of viral load that you have also affects how sick it can make you. So if you have a massive amount of viral load, then you would deduce that you would end up being more sick. In the beginning of the pandemic, what we were seeing was a large viral load. The thought process is back when we weren't wearing masks and we were having exposures, we were getting a full face of virus. So their viral loads were very large, which caused a lot of illnesses and death. As we started to have masking, we started to notice that that did help prevent more of that spread and that they were effective in decreasing that. So the R0 for this Delta is about 6 to 10, which means that on average, one person infects anywhere from 6 to 10 other people. And this is similar to the chickenpox and higher than smallpox. And vaccinated individuals who become infected can spread Delta variant to other people because that viral load is so large. In the beginning, what they've been seeing is the studies will show that even the vaccinated can transmit this virus. And usually, I think around day 5 is when the antibodies will kick in and drop that viral load. So in the very beginning, that's when they're most contagious. I'm not sure I answered all your questions, but.
Well, also, I was just thinking, and especially with children, and we're talking about children that can't get vaccinated. I know that there's a multi-system inflammatory syndrome that can be associated with COVID. And also, I don't think that although there are some effective treatments for adults, I don't think there are any for children. Is
Mostly
that
what
correct,
is
or?
happening now, there's lots of studies right now that are looking at different types of medications to see how they can help with treatment. It's tricky when it's a virus. Bacteria are easier to treat with antibiotics, and a virus is not. So typically, like with the flu before, we were told it just has to run its course, the same as a cold. That we need to just let it run its course and let our body fight it, and then we will recover from that. So viruses are harder to treat because of that. Currently, right now, the remdesivir, I believe, is the only the treatment that is specifically authorized for the use. I do not know if remdesivir is available to the children yet. I'm thinking.
I don't think it is,
I
but
don't
I'm
think
not
it is
sure
either,
either.
but I can look that up and double check on that. It's not something I researched prior to this, and I haven't heard of any of the kids getting remdesivir. Multi-inflammatory syndrome has been seen. I don't remember the data in my head, but I do have it printed out where I was reading about it. It is one of the things that the American Academy of Pediatrics is concerned about because it is found in children after infection, anywhere from several weeks. I think it was somewhere between 3 and 5 weeks after is when you can see that happening. The concern is that with this virus, you just cannot predict who is going to be affected in, a poor way. And with some of I know it's not always seen in the district. When you're looking at our dashboard, which is on our website, the numbers that are being reported on that dashboard, just to remind everybody, are students or staff that are on school grounds. You're not seeing all of the other, or the families aren't seeing all of the other cases that we are contact tracing that aren't on school grounds within the 48 hours of their infectivity. So when we find out that a person is positive for COVID, we need to find out when the symptoms developed or when they tested positive, and then we look back the 48 hours prior to that to see if they were on school grounds or any potential close contacts at school. And then when we identify that there was a person that was on school grounds during the period of infectivity, that gets reported to the district, and that is put on the dashboard. So there's a lot of things that we are doing behind the scenes that's not always seen, so you don't really get, I think, if you're just looking at the dashboard, how many cases do we actually have? I will say that throughout the year, last year, when it came towards the end of the school year, I reflected on how did our year go? And I remember thinking in the beginning, like, is this gonna help? It did for a while. It got really bad around spring break time when we had that variant increase, and the nurses were doing contact tracing, sometimes 12 hours a day. You would have 4 cases you were juggling at once, trying to get data from different sources and notify people that could potentially be close contacts, and it was exhausting. And it was depressing, and it was difficult, and you were looking for just something, like when can we get the kids vaccinated? When can younger families be vaccinated? I am an advocate for vaccine. I have been. My first job was at Children's Hospital. I worked in infectious disease. I saw the children getting sick who were not vaccinated. So I have been a proponent of vaccine. I will say I did a ton of research and followed the production of this vaccine from the start until it launched. And then I had a decision to make, was I going to be one of those people that got vaccinated? I have another job where I work in the neonatal ICU for hospitals, and I was fortunate to be one of the first people that were offered it in Michigan because of the ICU job. So, yeah, I did the research on that. I feel, as a nurse, a public health person, our vaccination is our way out of this. Throughout the contact tracing that we've done, we have seen that reflect on our own staff and students. And it's evident to me, of course, I've done the research, I've read the reports, but even working the job, I can see it working. When we are looking at this last surge that we had in the spring, it was generally affecting people under age 40. And at the time, that was the group that wasn't able to be vaccinated. So we were seeing it hit our families of our young parents or our young children. In the elementary school, we were getting lots of contacts that said, my husband's positive, I'm positive, and so we were seeing that age group, and we saw less of the age group that were able to be vaccinated. So it became apparent to me just from our own work here in the district, how that was helping to mitigate the things that were happening in school. So I do think it's important. I went back and forth with mask mandates, just as everybody did. Nobody wants to wear them. We all want to be rid of them. But at the same time, we have a large group of children that are not able to be vaccinated. They do not have approval, so it's not a choice. At some point, everybody's going to have the choice to vaccinate, and then we look at the risk levels. But right now, we have a group of kids, 12 and under, that can be affected by Delta. We're seeing more children be affected by Delta, especially since it is a group that is not vaccinated, so it is an obvious source for the virus to find. And I just feel that we need to do our part to help protect the vulnerable until they have an opportunity to weigh how they want to deal with this. So right now, I feel, based on what we've been doing currently, that this mask mandate is probably appropriate for this time. We went through the summer, probably about 5 weeks, without a single case. We didn't get notification, we didn't contact trace. We were happy to report weekly that we didn't have any cases on school grounds. And then about 2 weeks ago, the calls started. We started getting more notifications between staff and students, quarantines for families, so maybe parents who were testing positive, and it ramped up again. So yes, it's depressing. We had hoped that we were through this. We're beginning the school year feeling back where we started, and it's hard to do. But I do think that there's an end in sight, and if we continue to watch the data, find appropriate, reliable sources of information, and share that, then I hope that we can protect our students and staff.
The next question I'm going to go with, and I think it'll be more for Dr. Maleko, is we heard a few different times about the ability for either the instructional staff to have a microphone to help students hear them, or the ability for somebody to take their mask off like we do in our meetings when they're in instruction. What is our expectation for that?
So we talked about this, we had our full administrative meeting on Thursday, and what I talked to administrators about being reasonable. So right now, and we heard, comments were made about me taking off my mask here. Well, that's what we do, we're allowed to, and because I'm speaking in the microphones, we're distant, you guys have masks on, and so we're gonna be reasonable with the teachers as well. So if a teacher's at the front of the class, we're gonna ask that students are set back, so it's within that 6 feet, then the mask can come off, they should still have the mask with them, but the mask can come off as they're teaching from the class. As they go near a student, or they have to go into a small group, then the mask would go on. So we want the teachers to have the mask with them at all times, just like, right now, I still have it with me. I was speaking at Fortson, in front of our 100 administrators, and I took it off, but as soon as I went near someone, it went back on. And so that's what we're gonna ask to do, because if someone contracts the virus, if they're outside of that 6-foot radius, then we're okay, but if they go within and they're not wearing the mask, that's where we have the problem. So we're gonna be reasonable with that process, and so we're getting that word out, and we told the administrators that on Thursday.
Thank you. Trustee Barry?
I want to go back to Trustee Watt's question about health, emotional, and anxieties. I can give you some feedback. As you were asking the questions, I'm looking out to the room. All the educators were nodding up and down, so it was a great question. I know Mr. Saley said that we encourage parents to reach out to us, but at the same time, I think we need to respect our parents' rights once we start diagnosing a student, that right away get the parent involved and get their feedback. I was just making a comment, that's all, yeah, so. I want to go back to some of the remarks that we heard at tonight's meeting. I don't know if she's still here, Jillian. Thank you very much, you did an amazing job. We felt exactly what you were experiencing, so you did a great job talking to us. And I know it's not easy for a 16-year-old to come up here and talk to a bunch of strangers, so I appreciate what you did. The fact that we're being accused that we don't care, are you kidding me? There's over 50 years of service at this table, and we're here, we're probably gonna be here for another hour. Where were people last year when we sat in meetings for 5 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours, away from our families, away from our careers and what we wanna do? So we do care. We do care about our students, we care about our staff, and we do care about our community. I know a couple of ladies mentioned, people I consider friends, said, how do we get involved? Please do get involved. Reach out to the superintendent. You want to serve on a committee? I know you'll be welcome to serve on a committee and you can learn how this works. President Meza mentioned that we need to work together. Yes, of course we need to work together. I answer my phone rings just like all my colleagues do. I spoke to parents the last couple of days. I mean, they felt like they were threatening me by saying, if you have mask mandates, I'm taking my son or daughter out and send them to a different school. And a different phone call was, if you don't have mask mandates, I'm gonna take my son or daughter and take them to a different school. That's your right. We understand that. That's your right as a parent to make that decision. So it's not I don't perceive it as a threat. I always come back with, when I'm talking to parents, say, that is your right. You should do that. I believe when leaders fail us, it pegs us against each other. And last year, if you know me, I don't get too political at these meetings, but last year our governor was on TV almost pretty much every night. Where's she been? We're getting recommendations from her staff. We recommend mask mandates. Then there was a press release. We strongly recommend mask mandates, and she has yet to speak on this. So what happens, just exactly what we saw earlier, parents are pegged against each other, and parents are coming here attacking, questioning the motives of the administration. They're trying to look out for, 20,000 students and questioning how the board made decisions. No, don't come screaming at us. Don't come, you elected us to serve you. Send an email, make a phone call, let's talk. I'll quote President Meza again, that yes, we are in this together and we have to work together. Now, with all that being said, I do have some questions. I had the question written down before I came into this meeting, and I heard it from a few parents tonight. When we were making this decision, Dr. Maleko, was the long-term potential harm caused by masks to children, was that on the table? I don't know if it was because I wasn't at those meetings, but did we discuss that? Did we do the research on that? What are these masks doing to children? When parents are doing their own research and not questioning it, I have something I want to address too about masks later on, but was that considered part of the mitigation plan, the long-term harm that these masks can potentially do to children?
Well, I would say that the first thing is if you remember the recommendations from July, we had said strongly, or we didn't even say strongly, we were just recommended for the unvaccinated. So we were following the data and the research. To be blunt and honest, I'm not an epidemiologist. I rely on the epidemiologist to give me those reports and make those decisions. So what I have to do, and Ms. Khan sent out some information, and so we look at the reports. When I've got the CDC, the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, and Wayne County Health Department all strongly recommending that districts take a mandate, have I personally looked at all the different studies? No,
Personally, your
but-
team.
Well, as a
Was
team,
that
yeah.
discussed?
So we are looking at the data that we're getting. I understand about the masks as far as, none of us, I've had to change just personally, which mask can I breathe better in? So I understand that, and I understand for children, that's why we want to file MHSAA with sports. We've looked at all factors, but we still do have to rely on the experts from CDC, the health department, the epidemiologists, and that's what we've been doing. And that's where I could just say, superintendents put out a statement, and I decided not to read it, but generally it was this: we need direction from the health experts as to what we need to do. I said I have my PhD, no child left behind, education. It's not in health. I've learned so much in the last year and a half. We have excellent nurses, but we do need the doctors, the physicians, and those that really know to come out and stand up and give us direction. And so the direction has been tighter, but it hasn't yet been a mandate from the state. We understand that. Our superintendent associations have been asking for them just to make the call. But in the absence of that, we've had many meetings to go over all that data that you're talking about, including those factors. And we came to the best solution given the current data and the circumstances. It's not unending, meaning indefinite until, if the data changes, we're going to continue to review it and continue to look at that data. And yeah, we're going to take that into consideration. It goes to the social, emotional as well-being of, people that just don't want to wear it. Now, having said that, if a student does have a medical condition or some reason, they can submit, their note, and that's what we did last year as well.
Sure.
And that was discussed at the last meeting. We discussed that a couple of times, so there is a process for that.